December 24th, 1971. Most passengers aboard Lanza Flight 508 believed they would be home in time for Christmas. 17-year-old Juliane Koepcke sat beside her mother, smiling as the aircraft climbed into the sky above Peru. Her father had chosen to stay behind for work. It was supposed to be an ordinary flight. Outside the window, endless green rainforest stretched to the horizon, but far ahead, enormous storm clouds were already forming. The pilots decided to continue. They had flown this route many times before. Inside the cabin, people talked quietly. Some looked out the windows. Others closed their eyes and relaxed. No one imagined that within minutes their lives would change forever. The aircraft entered the storm. Rain hammered against the windows. Lightning flashed around the wings. The turbulence became violent. Passengers gripped their seats. Then came a blinding flash. A bolt of lightning struck the right wing. For a brief second, everything turned white. The engines roared. The cabin shook so hard that luggage flew through the air. People screamed. Then came a sound Juliane would never forget. A loud cracking noise echoed through the aircraft. The wing had failed. The airplane began breaking apart in midair. Seats ripped loose. The roof disappeared. Cold air rushed into the cabin. Juliane was still strapped to her seat. She looked up and saw nothing above her except the sky. The aircraft was gone. She was falling. Still tied to her seat, Juliane dropped nearly 10,000 feet toward the Amazon rainforest. She spun through the air, surrounded by broken pieces of the airplane. Wind screamed past her ears. Below her was nothing but an endless sea of jungle. No parachute, no control, no hope. Then, everything went black. Juliane sat among the wreckage, trying to understand what had happened. The airplane had disappeared. Around her, the Amazon rainforest was completely silent. She looked at her left arm. It was badly cut and covered in blood. Her collarbone hurt with every movement. Her face was scratched. One shoe was missing. Her glasses had disappeared during the fall, making everything around her blurry. She slowly checked her legs and feet. Nothing seemed to be broken. Somehow, she had survived a fall from nearly 10,000 feet. With great effort, Juliane stood up. She could barely keep her balance. The crash site stretched in every direction. Pieces of the airplane were hanging from trees. Broken seats, luggage, and twisted metal covered the jungle floor. She called for her mother. No answer. She shouted again. Only birds answered from high above the trees. Juliane refused to stop looking. She walked carefully through the wreckage, hoping to find another survivor. Instead, she found more debris scattered across the forest. Every few meters, another suitcase, another broken seat, another piece of the airplane. There were no rescue helicopters, no voices, no signs that anyone knew where the aircraft had crashed. Juliane knew the Amazon rainforest was one of the largest jungles on Earth. Her parents had spent years studying its wildlife. She remembered many of the things they had taught her. At that moment, she didn't know those lessons would soon become the difference between life and death. For now, she had only one goal: find her mother. Juliane continued searching the crash site. She walked slowly around broken sections of the airplane, calling for her mother again and again. Each time, only the sounds of the rainforest answered her. She searched beneath fallen branches. She looked behind twisted pieces of metal. She checked every place where someone might still be alive. Several passenger seats were scattered across the jungle floor. Suitcases had burst open, leaving clothes and personal belongings everywhere. Pieces of the airplane were hanging high in the trees. The crash site seemed endless. Minutes passed, but nothing changed. There were no voices, no movement, no rescue helicopters, no sign that anyone knew where Flight 508 had come down. Juliane stopped for a moment and looked around. The Amazon rainforest stretched as far as she could see. There were no roads, no houses, no smoke rising above the trees. Only an endless wall of green. Then she remembered the lessons her father had taught her during years of research in the Amazon. Never panic. Never walk without a reason. Look for moving water. Small streams eventually become rivers, and rivers often lead to people. It was the only plan that made sense. Juliane took one last look across the crash site. She called for her mother one final time. Silence. She knew she could not stay there any longer. Turning away from the wreckage, she took her first steps into the dense rainforest. Behind her remained the airplane. Ahead of her was the unknown. The fight to survive had only just begun. The river became Juliane's only guide. She stayed close to the water, following its course deeper into the Amazon rainforest. Walking along the river was far from easy. Thick vegetation blocked the shoreline. Large fallen trees forced her to climb over them or find another way around. Sometimes she had to step into the shallow water before reaching the bank again. Her clothes were constantly wet. Her shoes became heavier with every mile. The humid heat made every movement exhausting. Mosquitoes surrounded her from morning until night. Tiny insects crawled across her clothes and skin. Her injured arm continued to hurt, but she knew she couldn't stop. Without her glasses, everything in the distance looked blurred. She watched every step carefully, afraid of slipping on wet rocks or hidden roots. Time slowly lost its meaning. She no longer knew how many hours had passed since the crash. The rainforest looked the same in every direction. Only the river showed her where to go. Again and again, she remembered her father's advice: never leave moving water. Sooner or later, it would lead to people. As the sun slowly dropped behind the trees, strange sounds filled the jungle. Birds called from high above. Monkeys moved through the branches. Unknown animals rustled in the thick vegetation. Juliane kept walking. Every bend in the river gave her hope. Maybe the next turn would finally lead to another human being. But the river continued into the endless rainforest. For days, Juliane continued following the river. She was exhausted. Her body was covered with cuts, insect bites, and bruises. The wound on her arm became worse each day. Then she noticed something moving inside the injury. Fly larvae had entered the open wound. She remembered that leaving them there could cause a serious infection. Still following the river, Juliane finally discovered a small wooden boat tied to the riverbank. Nearby stood a simple shelter used by local fishermen and forest workers. No one was there. Inside the shelter, she found a small container of gasoline. Her father had once told her that gasoline could force larvae out of a wound. With no other choice, Juliane carefully poured gasoline onto her injured arm. One by one, the larvae began to come out. The pain was terrible, but the treatment worked. She spent the night near the empty shelter. The next morning, several forest workers returned by boat. At first, they could hardly believe what they were seeing. A young girl had survived alone in the Amazon rainforest. They gave Juliane food, carried her onto their boat, and took her to the nearest village. From there, she was flown to a hospital. She had survived 11 days alone in one of the most dangerous rainforests on Earth. Later, Juliane learned that her mother had not survived the crash. Years later, she became a biologist, following the same path as her parents. Today, her story remains one of the most extraordinary survival stories ever recorded.